Telecom Investment Act. And our intention there is to expand something that's currently on the ground, the Universal Service Fund, which supports rural telecommunication providers. We expect to have two outcomes for that. First, we want to stabilize that basic fund, and that goes to the rural telecoms that are out there providing telephone service in our most rural parts of the state, where service really needs to have some subsidy. But secondly, as we expand that fund and bring in our cable providers and our wireless providers into the fund that's currently maintained only by landline payers, the expansion will enable us to develop a broadband fund. We are hoping to have up to $5 million a year. That money will support operations of the newly constructed broadband office, and it will also give us that flexible funding that John Huffman talked about as being so critical to development of broadband across the state. We need to have a little bit of money that's available so that we can go out, we can provide technical assistance, we can help key up projects, we can do matches to federal funding, and sometimes we can actually be the infrastructure provider. So the expansion of the Universal Service Fund is key to both current telecommunications in our rural areas, and it's key to the telecommunications that we know are the future, and that's really broadband. So that will be our main effort in the 2020 session, and look for it then, the Rural Telecom Investment Act.
Thank you.
Move to you. With a stable mic, you have recently joined the Broadband Advisory Council. You do represent a significant constituency on the coast, so talk to us a little bit about your impressions of the legislation and why we need to do this work.
So the second part, the part that did not pass, was in the Senate, ready to go at the very end of the session. As many of you may know, there was a period of 8 days when our Republican colleagues chose not to show up for work. So we had 2 days at the end of the session to get it done. And I will tell you that Pam worked harder than anybody I've ever known to try to get this done. She was out working with everybody. As you may know, my issues were mostly about education. At the beginning of the session, I got on broadband just prior to the session beginning. I got appointed, so I got to make it to one meeting and got a hat. That was very nice. I just want to say thank you. I got my hat before Pam. I thought that was really weird, but because she didn't make that meeting. But it was really interesting, the first meeting, because they had the Farm Bureau in to talk about the needs of internet in Eastern Oregon. With most of the new equipment that's being built, it's run by GPS and internet connection. So it was interesting. Dave Dillon, who also is a student of mine and is the head of the Farm Bureau, was a student at Marsh. It was great to start hearing that all of the people in Oregon are seeing the needs to have internet connectivity everywhere. And as a person who lives on the coast, you can't drive in my district and be cell tower connected or internet connected all the time. There are blank spots everywhere. And that means going north-south or east-west. You lose it for a while. There are pockets of people who really like that. They don't want any of these strange airwaves in their area. And so there is opportunity for us to have conversations with lots of different people about the internet connectivity. My son was in debate in high school, and I always go back to my high school experiences. We had phone line internet service, so I understand the differences now. Unbeknownst to us, in the garage, he set up a little station for a computer, because as a debater, the topic was space research, and NASA put up their own line for him. But it took so long to print it that he would start it at night when he went to bed, and unbeknownst to the rest of us, print out sheets and sheets of paper for himself over the phone line, which cost us a lot of money when we eventually found out he was doing it. But he got his information, and it was through him originally that I really started understanding that this internet was here to stay and it was going to be here forever. Getting books from around the world, which he could do at our high school library because they had internet connections. It was the beginning of understanding from me how important this was going to be. And I will tell you the other one that was always shocking to me. We had 2 labs in our school, and one of our labs was more of the business lab where they were connected, and the other one was an art class lab that was connected. It was an Apple deal, but both of them had pretty good internet. We lost more mouse balls in the business one than we could afford to keep replacing. And I found out later, even though I was principal and didn't realize, the art one, the custodians and the teacher worked out a deal that it was open till like 11 o'clock at night. And kids would come on their own and could use the equipment because it was the only place they had really good internet. We never lost a mouse ball. We never lost anything. They knew that no one knew they could do it, and the teacher and everybody kept it quiet. But the fact that it was constantly used and constantly taken care of by the same people who were using it gave all of us pause to think, you know, we have to rethink this whole idea of taking care of stuff and thinking that somebody, adult, has to be in charge, because these kids cared about this so much that they were in charge, and they didn't let other people mess stuff up. And so this was a really powerful thing. On the broadband committee, I'm going to get engaged now and know a little bit more, but Pam's efforts need to happen. We have to find a funding source, and it needs to happen in the short session. And so we need to get it dialed up. We need all the input from other people, and I know that not everybody agrees that this is the best way to go about getting this money, but I will tell you that the connection from my mind is so great. You've got a fund that was set up to make sure that we have telephone service to everybody, and they have responsibilities for that last mile, and that is not inexpensive, and it takes extra money. We understand that, but that's become the same thing as we heard in the previous panel with internet. So we have to figure out how do we come up with a plan to help get that last mile from each of those, and we have to capitalize on it. Bandon has internet and has had cable to every house for a long time. They capitalized on AT&T coming in with their cable, and they got it worked out. The city runs their whole program. I was in a conversation with Facebook that's finding a cable again up the coast, and they were mentioning, well, tell us what you need in the community and let us try to help you figure out how to make that, whether it's cell towers or whatever. So there are opportunities that happen in Oregon because of other things we've taken advantage of, and we need to capitalize on.
Thank you. Now maybe we can turn up to Gordon for a little perspective on solutions from your vantage point and what you all may be looking for going forward.
Okay, so apparently this one's going to work, or not. So I'm the guy that builds the wireless network in Oregon and Washington for Verizon. I've been doing that for quite a while. Last year I was on the panel with Chris and Joe, and I noticed that who was the guy that was the commercial fisherman? Was it John? Scott. I used to be a commercial fisherman in Alaska. I never dragged on any cables, but I did fall out of the boat once. Lived to tell about it. So it really is billions and billions of dollars. Okay, so how many people in this room, while you've been in one of these panels, have accessed one of these things and have looked at it? Just raise your hand. So did you know you're accessing a finite resource that costs billions of dollars to maintain and operate and roll out? You can roll out high-speed internet. You can roll out broadband. And when we first launched the cell site that covers this building, we had more than 25 megabits down and 3 megabits up. Did I get that right, Chris? That's the current, or the definition of broadband. So we had that. When I tested in the room this morning, I had 3 megabits down. And then I walked outside and I got 31 megabits down. So you're screwing me up in here. But you're using this finite resource and it's sort of getting kind of padded down. And so I could invest something in my network to make it bring it back up. I would add antennas. I would add special antennas to the cell site that covers this location, and those antennas would be a couple, $50,000, $80,000, but the whole construction project would probably be about $300,000. It might have to go back through zoning, and then I have a piece of fiber that goes from this cell site. It goes back to a big data center in Hillsboro, Oregon, where we have those undersea cables going to Hawaii and Alaska. Sorry, but you know, in order to upgrade the optics on that piece of fiber, I might pay a fiber provider several $100,000s to add optics and upgrade that system. And so all of that might take a year, it might take 2 years, depending on the zoning and the permitting situation. And at the end of the day, you would probably get 100 megabits down here. And then more people would use more, and my daughter would go on Snapchat, and you'd do Netflix, and you'd do all this cool distance education stuff, and it would get padded back down. So it's a finite resource that needs constant investment. Verizon was opposed to Senator Marsh's bill. I'm sorry, I didn't know. I would have. I actually think it's a good idea. We don't think Universal Service Fund is the place to take it from. We'd rather you took it from the general fund. I work a lot with homeless people in Seattle. Every single homeless person that I deal with, they all have a cell phone. Every single one of them. That is the one necessity they cannot do without. They'll pay the universal service tax. So I'd rather not, you know, get way in depth in this because I don't want Senator Marsh to slap me or anything, but keep it down. Representative, I promoted you, sorry. But you know, we actually, in order to really bring the future of broadband to Oregon, we need to roll out a new technology called 5G. And 5G requires ultra-wideband radio channels. So when you think of that, again, think of billions of dollars, because that's what we paid for that spectrum. Think of a cell site, right? I got to build a lot of new cell sites, maybe on wood poles. Now, a 5G cell site, this is my visual aid here. It's about this big, and it goes on a telephone pole. This is a 5G cell site in size, okay? So when you're on the radio, when you're on your FM radio in your car, you might be on like 89.3, and then you switch it, and it goes to 89.5. You went up like 0.2 megahertz. So the channels that you need for 5G, think of if you took your channel and went, I'm going to go up one channel, and it went from 89 to 890. Okay, you skipped over all the 90s and the 107.5, and you went all the way up to 890. That's one 5G channel. That's what this technology does, and that's why it's so powerful. But in order to really make that work, you got to put it in a lot of places. I have to go on a lot of wood poles. I have to have fiber to every one of them. And last year when I sat on this panel, I was like, hey, I'm working with all these Oregon jurisdictions, and not one of them has a code that will allow me to do this. Not one of them has a workable code. And we're a year later, and thank you, Representative Marsh, for setting up the League of Oregon Cities. We had about 200 conference calls, but we still don't have a workable code in any more than 3 of those cities in all of Oregon. So I want to roll out 5G. I want to bring this to the 11 schools. You know, and actually, I think we should just get together on the 11 schools, and Verizon should just build a cell site by each of them. I'm willing to talk to you about that. But we need workable code. We need workable ordinances and regulations. And so that's my investment story.
Thank you. And I know it's a new and growing technology, so we appreciate the perspective. Sam, you are sort of chartered with representing consumers, which all of us in the room are, right? And we've talked a lot about, you know, education and healthcare and other sorts of institutions. So from the consumer perspective, can you talk to us a little bit about the Rural Telecom Investment Act, why it was important to you last year, why it's important in the short session, and kind of what you think some consequences could be if we don't get this done?
Sure. So for folks who aren't familiar with CUB, Citizens Utility Board, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan consumer advocate group formed by ballot initiative in 1984. And our our statutory obligation is to represent residential utility customers. And that is both on the energy side and on the telecom, or increasingly the information and communication technology side of things. So that's our role in the state. Historically, you know, we've been known for our advocacy work in the energy arena. However, we've always represented regulated customers of the regulated telecom utilities, so the phone companies, so your traditional wireline telephone. And that's kind of a starting place for why we were so engaged with and interested in Rep. Marsh's bill, House Bill 2184, which we're now rebranding and redubbing as the Rural Telecom Investment Act. Reason being, and I think we referenced this before, the bill has to do with the Oregon Universal Service Fund. So I'm going to get a little bit wonky here, but I think it's worth getting into the details and why CUB is so invested in this bill and why we think it's the best solution in order to ensure broadband ubiquity throughout the state. So the Universal Service Fund is a fund created in '99 by the legislature, and the general idea, the thesis there, was to ensure consistent, reliable, affordable, ubiquitous telephone service across all parts of the state. That principle, we would argue, applies today not only still for telephone, for voice service, but also for broadband, for high-speed internet. Reason being, the world has evolved. We live in a digital world now, and while there are still certainly many folks around the state who rely and still need the traditional wireline telephone service, many more folks increasingly want, require, prefer broadband access. So this fund, it's only paid for by traditional telephone customers. And the idea with the Rural Telecom Investment Act is to, in effect, broaden that fund outward and not have it only be paid for by wireline customers. So that would include wireless customers, as Gordon mentioned, as well as voice over internet protocol customers. By doing that, what we're able to do is actually lower the existing surcharge, the fee, in effect, on traditional telephone customers, but broaden that out. And what we would do with this money is, as Rep. Marsh mentioned, is stabilize this traditional fund, which again ensures stable, reliable, affordable telephone service throughout the state. And then spillover monies could be used then for infrastructure grants, for community planning grants, devoted really to rural, unserved, underserved areas. We think this is a good solution because universal service is all about the idea that we're in this together. We're in this together as a state, we're in this together as customers. And if we're all participating and we're all buying into this idea that folks deserve and require basic utility services, and broadband is a basic utility service, then we should all be a part of paying for it. Gordon mentioned that homeless folks, homeless communities, more often than not have a wireless device. That is true, certainly. I would offer this, that first there is a federal program out there called the Lifeline program that helps folks pay for their wireless service, their traditional landline service, and then also now their broadband service. So by and large, homeless communities or folks without home, they have a vehicle to help pay for that cost. I would also offer that it's incumbent upon broadband companies, whether that service is being provided by a municipal provider or a private company, we need to lower the cost of broadband service to customers. How am I doing the time here, by the way? Okay. So I think just to button up why CUB, as a utility customer advocate, thinks this bill is important, it's again because as a state, we're in this together, and if we are to acknowledge that broadband is a basic and essential utility service, really no different than electricity, something that should in effect live in the background, we shouldn't have to think about it, then we need to come up with a solution as a state to pay for it, to ensure that everyone has the ability to use that service, just in the same way we do with electricity or water tier. So I guess that's where it's at. Thank
you. And now turning to Steve, You've recently had a name change, if nothing else. So maybe if we could indulge you for a moment for folks who were familiar with Oregon Fiber Partnership, maybe you could just start out by explaining if and how Link Oregon is different, and then provide us with your perspective on this particular solution and kind of where you would fit.
Yeah, first I need to say two things. This is my second time at this meeting. I came here last year and I thought there would be like 200 people, maybe 100. It's a fantastic meeting. I learned so much about the issues on the coast. And I do have to confess, I'm not a native Oregonian. And my second confession is I've worked for 2 rival Pac-12 institutions. Sorry, Beavers and Ducks, but I'm all in on Oregon now. But I worked at the University of Washington, Senator Roblan's on water, and was involved in the development of the Washington State K-20 telecommunications network about 20 years ago. I took a national job, worked on higher ed internet issues for about 6 years. I think that aged me about 18 in that process. And I went back to Utah where I started my career. And I was at the University of Utah and I was on the board of an entity called the Utah Education Network. It's been around about 25 years and has done a tremendous job of delivering educational opportunity to kids in rural and frontier Utah, not unlike many of the locations we see in southeastern Oregon. So I've been to this rodeo in other states, but I hope I realize that there's an Oregon way, and I've had some tremendous mentors, many of whom are in this room over the last year and a half that I've been doing this job. I want to shout out Jock Mills, who's retiring from his advocacy role at Oregon State, who patiently tutored me in his office about the ways of Salem. He's going out to start a student advocacy training program at OSU, and I want to attend some of those lectures. I want to thank Representative Marsh and Jason Yunker, among others around the room, for just kind of teaching me things. Joe Fernell has tolerated me in his offices in Hermiston and has taught me a lot. But what Lake Oregon is, as Carrie said in the introduction, we're a nonprofit. And the way I'd say it is 5 of the largest public entities in the state are hunting as a pack and taking a common approach to statewide broadband. So we have the 4 research universities, the Beavers and the Ducks, and the Vikings, PSU, as well as OHSU, which to my knowledge does not have a mascot. We'll call them the Scrubs. And also state government. And these entities all have statewide presences, with the exception of PSU, which is confined to the city of Portland. But OHSU has a clinical or a teaching presence in every county. The state has a presence, and with the extension mission, OSU does. So we're thinking together. Many of our sites are within blocks of each other in rural communities. So let's work together on a statewide backbone. That was the formative principle behind our network. We formed as a nonprofit. We have a board, and I'm really pleased with this board. We have 4 members from the state, including Terrence Woods, who is the state CIO, and also Brandon Finn, who is the governor's infrastructure advisor. We have all 4 of the CIOs of the research universities. So we've created a vessel for assets and moving together on joint projects. And we specifically didn't limit ourselves to doing networks because we know the network is essentially a gateway to doing other things in information technology. So down the road, we may do something in cybersecurity, we may do something in research computing, but we've got a vessel and a governance means established to do this. We're folding in the existing narrow network, which the University of Oregon has operated for about 20 years. Notably, that supports about 35% of the school districts around the state. And we want to grow that. We're going to partner with the Department of Education on that. Our members have made a substantial investment in acquiring dark fiber, the fundamental raw material of the telecommunications network, as Gordon described. Acquiring that from commercial telecom providers, namely CenturyLink, Peak, and Zayo. And we have now a 2,500-mile network across the state that we're in the process of lighting. We believe fundamentally in partners, and so a new state broadband office is critical for us. It's a state agency, whereas we're the freestanding nonprofit. USDA Rural Development. John Huffman's been a tremendous mentor. And also a less-known office in the U.S. Department of Commerce by the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NTIA, that does an awful lot in setting broadband and spectrum policy. We seek to connect schools, libraries, healthcare, and tribes. Our mission is really to support the 4 basic missions of our members: education, healthcare, public service, and research. And I just want to close with a couple of thoughts about the coast, since we're here. I think there are 5 things that are unique about networking the coast now, one of which is changing demographics, both older population and also a growing population. So that will drive new facilities for healthcare and education. That's an opportunity for us to build network facilities in the right way with that funding. Number 2 is resilience. When we do not have fiber yet in our network on the coast, with the exception of Newport. We want to go up and down 101 from Astoria to Brookings and work with a variety of partners to do that. We want underground fiber. I'm the son of a geologist. I've been in Chile after a magnitude 8.5. These are survivable quakes. We can learn a lot from Chile since they've been going through those quakes for over 450 years now. And so that in our network design, we want multiple paths over the coast range. I'd like to have 5. Working with the tribes on the coast are critical. The tribes have unique capabilities and needs, and they are a logical partner for us. The cable landings, what we heard about from Senator Roblan, taking advantage of a new cable landing and getting local infrastructure built out as part of that deal is so critical. And the last thing I want to say is, it might be a little surprising, don't forget research. Compared to our neighboring states in Washington and California, we do not have a national lab in Oregon, but we do have significant federal research capabilities. And most of them in Oregon are here on the coast. We have the NOAA fleet based in Newport. We have a NOAA fisheries office up in Astoria or Warrenton. And we also have a new Department of Energy project around wave energy going in around Walport. All these facilities require extensive connectivity that will drive fiber investments. And in my experience, where science goes, bandwidth always follows, because science is totally data-driven. So those are some thoughts about what we're doing. As far as this legislation, as a nonprofit, I can't support legislation. Personally, I'll say it was a great idea. I've been in D.C. a number of times. What I like about what I'm seeing now in Oregon is we're partnering in new ways. I'll say it directly, as John Huffman said, we are leaving dollars on the table in D.C. And by hunting as a pack, we're a long way away from D.C. We can go compete for those dollars more. I was just in North Carolina seeing how well the 3 universities in the Research Triangle work together. We need to be more like that. And what this legislation would provide is critical matching funds for us to go get those federal dollars. We can't get those federal dollars without matching funds. Even the grant program in USDA Reconnect that John described had a requirement for matching dollars. So that's a little bit about Lake Oregon and why we think this legislation is so important.
Well, thank you. We do have just a couple of minutes to kind of circle back to some of the panelists and address some questions. So if I may, Representative Marsh, first of all, is there anything you would add to the questions about the importance of enacting the Rural Telecom Investment Act next year? And beyond that, is there anything that you could provide in terms of perspective around sort of where we would end up if we weren't successful next year, and maybe what some of the consequences of that could be?
Well, I think there's no question that our goal should be to come as close as possible to having all Oregonians online. And we know that technology is key to everything that we do. It's ubiquitous. It's the way we entertain ourselves, the way we communicate with each other, the way we educate ourselves, increasingly the way that we get health care. It is critical to many of our natural resource sectors in our rural areas, increasingly used in agricultural, in forestry, in fishermen work, fishing industry. And so we really have no choice but to take this on in a vigorous way. And developing the office was the first great step forward. Coming up with a source of flexible, predictable money that we can use to key up projects is really the next piece of it. And that's why we are focused so hard on going after this in the 2020 session. If we do not identify a source of funding, it's going to be really hard to maintain that office. The office is key to all kinds of technology. We need to have somebody in charge to key up 5G when we're ready to do that, to bring people together, to identify champions. And so this is a critical moment. And I think it's a critical moment as well because, I mean, as we talk about unrolling 5G, please understand that that race to that technology is really an urban-centered activity. 5G is going to unroll along the I-5 corridor. And if we don't act at the same time to address those technology gaps that exist way out in the boondocks where we're struggling to have any kind of connectivity, we are going to see those gaps widen, the abyss between urban and rural, and those with resources and those without resources. And make no mistake, the availability of technology is a generational issue in our far-flung communities. If we do not have it, those communities will wither over time. So it's all critical, and I think the really good news is that we are bringing together the partners, the resources, the office, the capacity, and so we can really, I think, reasonably set for ourselves the goal of bringing technology all across the state, and then helping people to understand how to use it to best benefit themselves.
Well, and maybe that's a good segue to a question for Senator Roblan in terms of, you know, you do represent a very unique geography and natural resources, and you talk about the use of technology in some of the industries maybe that are prevalent in your communities but not elsewhere. What will you be telling your constituents about this effort as we roll into February and kind of move through the short session?
Yes, so for me, it is trying to make sure that the coast is on a fiber backbone. The research part is really big to us. If you really think about the coast, starting in Warrington, we've got food stuff that the Oregon State University is working on, and seafood processing. You go all the way down at Newport, you've got the university, and you've got NOAA. You go down to Coos Bay, you've got the University of Oregon's research field. The universities have gone down to Port Orford because of our offshore reserves and put in a workstation down there. All of those need to be connected. And then you take the rural hospitals that dot our coast all the way down to Brookings. They need the internet to provide the services that they need to provide. You heard, if you were in any of these yesterday, on Shake Alert and on Fire Alert. The only way Shake Alert and Fire Alert work is that they're connected to a wire, so that that information can get to where it needs to instantaneously and do what it's supposed to do, which is alert us. So if we want to protect our environment and keep fires out, if we want to make sure that rural people can get the health care that they need, it is important that we have the internet. We have an old Marshfield High School student who is a plastic surgeon at Pitt. He decided that rural Oregon needs to have plastic surgeons because they fix bones, they take people's hands and make them work again. They do a lot of stuff that people don't think about plastic surgeon. So we have a residency program with Pitt, Ohio State University in Coos Bay, Oregon, that produces 3 residents a year, most of whom have stayed in rural Oregon. So that doesn't work without high-speed internet and the ability to be communicated from Pitt to Ohio State to Coos Bay, Oregon. The whole coast needs to take advantage about that and understand it and know it. As we were saying, University of Washington has done some stuff. One of the cables that lands at Pacific City is the University of Washington cable. It goes 125 miles or so out into the ocean, sits in the last little piece of equipment that's on it is down in the caldera of a volcano that's out there underwater. waiting for it to go and send information. Attached to that line is multiple pieces of equipment to keep monitoring the ocean so we know what's going on. All of those things, our fishermen are probably as savvy with regard to using the internet, tracking things, doing other kind of stuff as anybody you know. GPS, all the stuff. They know the ocean better than most of the rest of the people that are doing research on the ocean. So it is technology that drives innovation and drives economies on the coast. People don't know, we had a little deal yesterday, Near Space Research is up in Tillamook. They launched balloons for NASA, for everybody else, to get stuff up into space. We've got a place down in Bandon that makes night scope lenses for the military, everybody else and stuff. We have really high-tech businesses up and down the coast. They are located in places where the internet is strong enough to do their business. And if we want to continue to build those things, we need an internet that is going everywhere. So, thanks.
Well, if my internet-connected device is correct, we have reached 11 o'clock, which I think is our wrap-up time. So thank everyone for participating, both the first panel and this panel. I speak, I think, for all of us except Steve, who, as a nonprofit, cannot get excited about things. But we are excited to work. He is personally excited, but not as part of a nonprofit, to work on getting the Rural Telecom Investment Act across the finish line in the short session next year. So thank you all. And I'll turn it over to you.
I just want to say, you have 15 minutes, which is nice because you can actually talk to some people about what's going on, until the next next presentation starts over in the auditorium across the hallway. And that one is Statewide Approaches to Innovation, Why Investing in Shared Prosperity Matters to All Oregonians. So Tina Kotek will be one of the members, Mark McMullen, Tobias Reed will be the panel, and I encourage you all at 11:15 to be across the hall in the auditorium. So thanks for being here.